Hey, yo. If I can be serious for a minute.
Oh, yeah!
Acknowledge me.
What's happening, everybody? Come on in, sit down. It's time for another DB's Territory Treasures. I am DB, the Dirty Bird. Thanks for tuning in. I want to thank everybody on listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SportzWire Radio, iHeartRadio, all those podcast platforms out there. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and checking out my side project. A little housekeeping. I want to remind you to check out the Sit Down Marks podcast, where myself, Dylan, and Primo, we talk about wrestling news each and every week and everything that's going on in the world of wrestling. So check out sitdownmarks.com and check out Sit Down Marks on all those podcast platforms out there. Today, I get to talk about the man that got me interested in wrestling, actually. Now, I was into wrestling, but the one that got me hooked was a guy that came to the ring. He was dancing, he was jumping around, he had straight energy, and he just caught my attention. So today we're going to talk about the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. That's right, Mercy Daddy. Let me tell you something. The territory was NWA. Jim Crockett Promotions is where I fell in love with this man in the sport of wrestling. But let me tell you a little bit about the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. He was born as James Harold Fanning, August 6th, 1942, in a little town of Tullahoma, Tennessee. Now, you know, Jimmy's been married to a few women, most notably his wife Angel since 1991. He moved around a bit as a kid. He was raised in Hammond, Indiana, actually, a town where one of my friends lives now. Very cool. I had no idea he was from up that way. He's more known around in the Virginia area, but he was a wrestler, a trainer, an author, a manager, and believe it or not, actor and a singer. This guy was an entertainer, man. You know, he worked all over the U.S., you know, USA wrestling, you know, but mostly he was known for being trained by AWA legend Vern Gagne. Now, Jimmy debuted in 1964 at St. Andrew's Gym in Chicago, which was where he had his first match. You know, he was known for being seen in places like Georgia Championship Wrestling, the original GCW, Mid-Atlantic, NWA, where I fell in love with him. AWA, he wrestled St. Louis territory and even wrestled for Fritz in Texas. But have you ever heard anybody say Mercy Daddy? That was kind of like his little, you know, moniker he'd say a lot in between, you know, in between promos or, you know, or that kind of stuff. So it's kind of like the one, his signature catchphrase, if you will, if he had one. He did have a little stint in the WWF. He was in a tag team with Chief Jay Strongbow, which, you know, an infamous heel turn happened which landed Jimmy in the WWF title match once versus Pedro Morales. So it's kind of like his claim to fame there in the WWF, except for he captured the tag titles in 1974 with his kayfabe brother, Johnny Valiant. Now, in the 70s and 80s, he was a major player in Memphis wrestling. He even feuded with the Memphis King himself, Jerry Lawler, and also, you know, which, you know, he was tied to for a lot of his wrestling career, a guy by the name of Bill Dundee. But the thing about Jimmy, though, you know, definite crowd favorite wherever he went, you know, but he always stayed, you know, somewhere around the mid card, you know, if you will, you know, especially, you know, in the NWA. But Jimmy had, you know, he wrestled a lot of places, you know, most notably where he got his name was in the NWA and Jim Crockett Promotions, you know, based out of eastern part of the USA, you know. But let's talk a little bit about Boogie in Jim Crockett Promotions. You know, listed at 6'3", 251 pounds. He, you know, he had the long blonde hair, right? The beard, the bandana around his head, long boy pants that would, you know, sometimes have, you know, stripes on them, you know, somewhere, you know what I mean? Usually vertical stripes. They weren't always, you know, visibly, pleasing, but he definitely stood out. Huge baby face. He always got the crowd going. He was a great guy to send out to start off a card, to make the fans happy, and he had this interest music, right? While he was in Crockett, it was awesome because he was claiming, he's doing this moniker as like the boy from New York City, so he adopted this song, which ended up being his entrance song by a band called the Manhattan Transfer, and the song was called Boy from New York City, and it went a little something like this. I mean, I could basically sing that, song word for word because it meant that much, to me as a kid to hear this, song when he came, as soon as that, doom, 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 like as soon as that started, man, like I was, all over it. You know what I mean? Like that's what would get me all pumped up and fired up and be excited to watch his wrestling match. But he had unmatched energy really when he came to the ring, and Jimmy had good vibes, before vibes was a thing. He called his fans the street people, which I thought was cool. I don't know anybody else calling their fans like a certain group, that kind of stuff, but the street people was his fans. It was kind of he was ahead of his time. Crowd favorite, obviously, on any card he was on. His charisma was on 100 at all times, an entertainer, if there ever was one, right? Mercy Daddy, his promos were sneaky good. I mean, he yelled a lot in them, but you felt it. You felt the passion, of Jimmy, because he was always like bouncing a lot, moving a lot. His eyes would get real big. His promos with Bob Caudle, Tony Schiavone, they're just timeless, man. And he was an entertainer, committed to his craft and in every aspect of it. When he wrestled, his moves weren't always like fantastic. I mean, they were, kind of like a hot tag. He would come in, clothesline, elbow drop, shoulder tackle, hip toss, leg drop, nothing crazy, but we're entertained, but he come in just fired up, you know what I mean? Like always on 100, you know what I mean? And the way he sold his moves in the ring was, for lack of a better term, were kind of seizure like, you know what I mean? He would shake a lot, you know what I mean? But he can make a heel look great. And when he got his tail beat, you would know it because he'd be flopping everywhere like a fish, And he was famous for even having a valet. He had a lady next to him named Big Mama in 1986. Now, she was big in a certain way, which, got her the nickname. And, if you're a man watching during this time, why they called her Big Mama. If not, go ahead and look it up. Big Mama, 1986 WCW. Jimmy's biggest and longest feud was with and against a guy in Jim Crockett Promotions called Paul Jones and Paul Jones Army, which, I mean, lasted nearly about 5 years, which is crazy considered, no feuds really last longer than, basically a year these days, But, he had dog collar matches with him, hair versus hair. He would fight everybody in his stable and his posse. He even lost a loser leaves town match against Paul one time and came back with a mask on, and he was calling himself, Charlie Brown from out of town was his name. Kind of like when Hogan left as Hulk Hogan and he came back as Mr. America, but, not quite on that level, but let's talk about this because this is what really locked me in. It was after I got to be entertained. His most legendary feud and build up was on July 26, 1986 in Greensboro, North Carolina, the Great American Bash, right in the middle of NWA territory in Greensboro. Paul Jones versus Jimmy Valiant. This was the hair versus hair. Loser gets his head shaved, by the other person. Now, as a kid, 1986, I'm just a tick over a decade old. And, now I thought, there's no way Jimmy gets his head shaved. There's no way he's losing. This is a big match. And I've never really seen Jimmy lose, like a big match yet, But I remember like it was yesterday, man. Jimmy had black and blue long boy tights on. Jimmy had coined the phrase ball-headed geek leading up to this match. And that's what he was calling Paul. And this is how you're going to end up. And, all that kind of stuff. And, leading up to the match. But Paul had an army, right? And in this army was the guy that I still hate to this day, Pistol Pez Watley. I think they were calling him Shaska Watley at this time. He was in the faction, the Barbarian, Baron Von Roski, and others that Jimmy had to deal with on a regular basis. And they got involved. And during the match, Jimmy lost the match at the Great American Bash. I'll never forget the look of Jimmy's face as his head was being shaved. I couldn't believe it. The fans were shocked. And a legendary shot of Jimmy was when he's sitting in this chair and they're shaving his head with like some clippers, giving him the old buzz cut, and he was shaking as they cut his hair. I'm 11 years old, crying, asking my dad, why didn't he win? Like, I don't understand, you know what I mean? And, and my dad just kind of laughing because I didn't understand how wrestling worked yet, but that's how you kept engaged, because after that, or that's how you keep people interested in stories, the great stories anyway, and then so I was really hooked, right? And I'm like, well, he's going to have to get revenge on him. So then we get to the very last blow off match between these two. Enter Starcade 86. Now enter Big Mama as well, Jimmy's valet. Hair versus hair again, but this time it's Big Mama's red hair that's on the line this time. And Jimmy cut a legendary promo about this match. Check it out.
It gets closer and closer to hair versus hair. Let's bring in the boogeyman, Jimmy Valiant and Big Mama. I'm sure you've seen the picture now that Paul Jones had.
Tony, if you don't think that the boogeyman's in love with Big Mama, you're nuts. You have flipped your lid. Brother, just look here. Just look here. You see, baby, I got Big Mama on my head. I got Big Mama on my shirt. And I got Big Mama on my knuckles. Tattooed in. That's for life. You see, Mr. Willie. He's gonna be 30 feet up above. There's no sweat there. You see, Big Mama loves her boogeyman. Big Mama is gonna put up her gorgeous red hair against your dirty black hair, greasy black hair, Paul Jones. Now, brother, if that ain't love, what is? You see, it's just simple. I asked for one more time, and I got it. All right, here it goes. Paul Jones, if you beat me, every red hair on Big Mama's head will be shaved. If I beat you, then finally, you will be the bald-headed geek. And all my people, all my brothers and sisters, don't you dare deny your boogeyman in this time, because you see, it will happen. Starcade, it will happen. Paul Jones, nothing but gospel. You will be a bald-headed geek. Last time, and then it's over. It's going to happen now. Starcade time. Big Mama, let's go. All right.
Okay, for Bob Connolly, Johnny Weaver, I'm Tony.
All right, so there is the somewhat legendary, if you're a Boogie Woogie man, a promo of him, and I always laugh too at the breaths he has to take in between talking. Let me tell you, Big Mama, all that kind of stuff. But he put everything he had, into wrestling, but in this story, as it always should, the good guy wins in the end. So perfect. I still hate Pistol Pez Watley to this day. You can go back and listen to an old Sit Down March podcast, our most hated wrestlers. He's on mine, because him and Paul Jones, they ruined me because they tried to take out my guy. You know what I mean? So, but, Jimmy's 83 years old now, 60 years in this business. You know, they're great people in wrestling, beloved, goodwill ambassadors. You know, Jimmy is all that. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 1996 with his kayfabe brother Johnny. They were actually the first tag team inducted, if you didn't know that. Boogie's wrestling camp. He had like a camp school where he was academy where he was teaching kids. This opened up in 1992 in Shawsville, Virginia. Now I am not sure if it is still open. God, I hope it is. Jimmy actually wrestled his last match in Virginia in 2021, I think, was the date. But now I want to tell you this too, a quick little tidbit before we get out of here. You heard me say Jimmy was a singer, but what you may not know is he released an album called Boogie Jam with a song on it called Son of a Gypsy, where he wrote it with WWE Hall of Famer Jimmy Hart. And so I guess maybe because of this, he was inducted into the 2025 New England Music Hall of Fame. Now, last I heard, Jimmy Valiant, he was in Shawsville, Virginia. I hope he's having a great life because he deserves it. And I hope he knows that he touched the hearts of some 80s kids wrestling fans like myself. I hope he's doing very well. Now, you know, this is the time in the Territory Treasure where I usually tell you of my connection, you know, but, you know, the connection is he's the reason I'm in wrestling and into it. You know, I'll never forget being 9 or 10 years old, seeing Boogie come to the ring, having as much fun as he was, dancing, singing, loving what he does. Boy from New York City playing in the background, and me, you know, all eyes locked in on pro wrestling and Jimmy Valiant, jumping, clapping, you know, just like that. And, you know, I'm hooked on wrestling. So I want to say inadvertently, you know, I don't know if you ever hear this, but thank you, Jimmy. You know, I miss the elbow drops, the hip toss, the beautiful elbow, the sleeper, you know, hold. But I really do miss checking you out, Jimmy, and watching wrestling, and you know, I like to go back and watching the archives now, look up old, you know, YouTube videos of him doing work, and just knowing, you know, like at that age and that time, you know, I was, you know, oblivious to the world, right? Like we didn't know everything about it and how old it, you know, or how bad it was or can be or how good it is, you know. But I'm just in the pro wrestling. I'm loving a guy named, you know, Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant. Dad bought me my first T-shirt that had his picture on it, and it was when I really first felt like a fan. You know what I mean? And then, you know, I remember the next show I went to after that, somewhere around Spartanburg, probably, or, you know, around that area, South Carolina. And, you know, he's on the card, and I just couldn't wait to wear my shirt, you know, to the event, you know, and, you know, just hoping that, you know, maybe I can get a glimpse of him, you know, maybe I can touch him as he comes by. Maybe he'll slap my hand, you know, that kind of stuff, you know, the same stuff, you know, that, you know, you probably have a story with, you know, people that love seeing us, you know, see him do that and that kind of stuff. But, you know, not many people can say they had over 10,000 matches, you know, and Jimmy's in that, in around that, you know, so to speak. So I want to thank you guys all for joining me today. It's been another Territory Treasures with myself, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in and checking it out. See you guys again on DB's Territory Treasures. Mercy, Daddy.